Here's a scenario. You are an insider agent tasked with bringing down the richest and most powerful country in human history down from the inside. How do you do it? You could be an adversary, such as a Russian spy or a Chinese agent. You could even be blackmailed by a so-called ally to gain blackmail and leverage. Hell, you could even be a born and bred American who just wanted to win no matter what the cost, even at the expense of your own country. If you want to find out about how America became the absolute dominant superpower, watch this video first. But what you need to know is that the US went from being the richest country in human history, with values which were universally looked up to and the best science, education, innovation and businesses, to one where 2/3 of its people can't afford a $500 emergency bill. A full-time minimum wage worker can't make enough rent anywhere in the country. If they want to afford a one-bedroom rental, they'd have to work 79 hours a week just to make rent alone. And almost 70% of people are just living paycheck to paycheck. No one has any trust left in anything, and everything is just getting worse. Here is how to turn an up-and-coming utopia into a dystopia in 5 easy steps. Step 1. The worker is dead. Long live the shareholder. Workers are doing too well. Their incomes are growing at a great rate, equal to their productivity. America's river system allows for really easy and cheap transportation around the country, and along with the introduction of rail and the Industrial Revolution, exposes the entire continent to effectively free and efficient commerce. There have been issues with stagflation and energy price shocks, but overall, the social contract is holding up. Everything is going well for them. This needs to change, and your job as the insider agent of chaos is to shake that up. Here's how to do it. Popularize an idea called neoliberalism. Liberalism to refer to limited government reach, and neo referring to the fact that this has been tried before. Whatever you do, just don't look at how that ended. Okay, what does neoliberalism entail? Well, for starters, weaker unions, so weaker bargaining power. Build on the passing of the Taft-Hartley Act that limits the power of unions, and start fights with unions yourself to signal a sentiment shift. If you want to really cause damage, fire 11,000 of them. Neoliberalism also results in policy drift. That's when regulations become ignored, unenforced, or outdated due to changes in the political, economic, or social environment. Use the filibuster to block reform to modernize the National Labour Relations Act, or the NLRA, in 1978. That way, you can effectively ban unions and make them obsolete without passing a single law. The NLRA was set up to help workers unionize and strengthen collective action after the Great Depression. And the Senate tried to vote 6 times to update it, but were blocked by the filibuster. What's a filibuster, you ask? We'll get to that in a minute, just you wait. But here's how to really make it stick. Find and influence a man called Jack Welch, CEO of General Electric at the time. He will be known as the man who broke capitalism. Under his tenure, the company worked from a worker-driven company, one which balanced the interests of workers, communities, and investors, to a ruthless ideology, prioritizing profit at all costs. Mass layoffs were no longer a last resort for survival, but a tool to boost short-term profits. The bottom 10% of employees were fired yearly, regardless of their performance. Neutron Jack is now his nickname for his ability to vaporize entire teams. Kill the idea of loyalty or job security. He smashed unions, was responsible for the rise of stock buybacks, offshore jobs to places like Mexico, and if they had to remain domestically, they went to contractors with lower pay, benefits, and no job security. Whilst worker pay stagnated in his 20-year reign, CEO to worker compensation jumped from 50 times, which is already really insane, to 400 times. He even rolled back GE's production sector and started becoming a finance company focusing on generating short-term profits, mostly through debt, shady trading, and accounting maneuvers, even being a major holder of subprime mortgages. This is not enough though. You need to now send your proteges across the corporate world. Welch-trained executives now hold positions in dozens of major companies, such as Boeing, 3M, Honeywell, Chrysler, Albertsons, and Home Depot, as they were all envious of GE's corporate success. Wall Street is teeming with Welchists thanks to its booming stock price, and business schools are teaching his ruthless profit-making methods. Welchism is now the manual of corporate America, and it's an ideology largely inspired by the neoliberal economist Milton Friedman, the guy who argued that the only social responsibility of a company is just to increase its profits. So this all makes sense. The social contract has now begun to break. Companies are now no longer supposed to serve workers and the public communities they're in, but only have a duty to their shareholders. The increasing productivity wasn't going to make the workers wealthy, but instead lining the pockets of managers, CEOs, and capital owners. Shareholder value becomes the new corporate buzzword of the day. The idea that a company exists to provide a product or service to people is outdated. Instead, a company is legally required to provide a fiduciary duty to its shareholders. Rig the tax code so that the super rich get tax cut after tax cut, regardless of whether it was a Republican or Democrat administration, such as the Revenue Act of 1978, passed under the Carter administration. allow companies to offshore easily, or make it easy to lay off their workers whilst raking in billions in profits. That's how you can kill entire cities like Pittsburgh, Chicago, Detroit, and the entire Rust Belt. For the first time in 3 decades, real wages and productivity began to diverge, hence this split. This is a whole video in itself, one I actually made, so watch that next if you want to find out how that happened. Step 2. Show them who's really in control here. After increasing regulations in the 60s, such as the creation of the EPA and OSHA, it suddenly got harder to get away with breaking the rules. Costs are rising, so you, as the agent of chaos, see it your mission to break that. You need to reframe corporate lobbying from a reactive game to a proactive one. Corporate headquarters start moving their base to Washington, D.C., or at least opening major offices there, and ideological think tanks start being funded. You send the Powell Memo in 1971. The memo talks about how corporations should come together and build a permanent political influence together. And this wasn't a random economist or lobbyist who was involved. This was sent to the Chamber of Commerce and sent around the department. Within a few years, there's an explosion of corporate PACs, trade associations, and corporate-funded think tanks. That way, you can invest in politicians who will roll back regulation, labor protections, and reduce taxes. In fact, you set up the Business Roundtable in 1972, recognizing that, as various CEOs admitted, the thing that affects business most today is government. The Business Roundtable brings together CEOs of the largest US corporations to directly lobby members of Congress. Within a decade, the number of companies with offices in Washington increases by more than 5 times. Buckley versus Valeo in 1976 also strikes down limits on spending from individuals, groups, or self-funding, holding that it was protected by the First Amendment. That meant that the rich, whether people, PACs, or groups, were allowed to spend as much money as they wanted. Now, you have the resources and focus to influence multiple policy avenues, and it is massively successful. You win major victories, such as the defeat of a consumer protection agency, even when public opinion favored reform. The pharmaceuticals industry, known as Big Pharma, especially the Sackler family, can now spend tens of billions of dollars marketing addictive opioids, as well as paying doctors to sell those drugs to patients who didn't need them to begin with. That would lead to hundreds of thousands of opioid deaths, but the Sacklers and people like them walked away with billions and tens of billions of dollars in profit. All that without anyone going to jail, and when the Department of Justice finally pursues them, they choose to give them civil liability, aka near complete protection, even though they themselves didn't even ask for it. I mean, forget the Sacklers and Purdue for a second. Just look at the entire healthcare industry. This is incredible. We own the entire system. We can overcharge year on year. We can discriminate as much as we want. They're still gonna bite, because they have to. Just ignore the fact that medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcies in the US. That's a plus for us. The thing that every country takes for granted, even supposedly second and third world nations, destroys your life in the US. Same with maternity and paternity care, sick leave, holiday pay, even how you do your taxes. Every country does it automatically, except the US. That's because TurboTax has successfully lobbied Congress for years to make it complex. So complex that you have to use their own system or spend hours and hours doing it yourself. And do you remember your old friend Jack Welch, CEO of GE? Well, GE just had over 1,000 acquisitions in his tenure. That set off a mergers and acquisitions boom across the country, leading to massive concentration of every single industry. Concentration is nothing new, but that's not the issue. The issue is that we have these pesky anti-monopoly laws stopping us. And here's how we get past that. We need to focus the idea of antitrust solely on the consumer. It doesn't matter if monopolies result in wage suppression, political influence, gatekeeping, or supply squeeze. As long as prices remain reasonable for customers, you're fine. Now, monopolies need to harm the entire system, not just their competitors. Raise the bar significantly for what counts as a monopoly. Make it all theoretical and have landmark cases that narrow the definition. Plus, the information you need to prove it is now found inside the company. Whilst companies can get the case tossed out easily before the accuser even gets the chance to look through your emails or files, making it insanely expensive to run an antitrust case. All this leads to the exact outcome we want: more concentration, increased profits to the top 1%, squeezed wages for the working class, and more money for corporations to lobby with. Corporate lobbying to the SEC leads to stock buybacks exploding and stock options being cheaper to pay out to managers and CEOs, hiding billions and inflating their profits. And it leads to the explosion of wealth in the top 0.1%, who once more use it to lobby the government harder.
It's perfectly legal for our bank to hire a team of lobbyists whose entire job is to make sure that the government gives the bank what it wants. Then those lobbyists can track down members of Congress who regulate banks and help raise a ton of money for their re-election campaigns. It's perfectly legal for those lobbyists to offer those same politicians million-dollar jobs at their lobbying firm. Then those lobbyists can literally write the language of this new bailout law themselves and hand it off to the politician they just buttered up with campaign money and lucrative job offers. And it's perfectly legal for those politicians to take the lobbyist written language and sneak it through Congress at the last second. So now you've got a law that greatly benefits the banks and the whole process can start over. This is how a bill becomes a law. A special interest hires some lobbyists, those lobbyists collect campaign contributions, offer jobs, and then write the laws that Congress then passes to help those same special interests. This happens every day on every single issue with politicians of both parties. In the last 5 years alone, the 200 most politically active companies in the United States spent $5.8 billion influencing your government. Those same companies got $4.4 trillion in taxpayer support, and that's trillion, with a T.
Suddenly, it no longer matters what the public wants. Sure, you still have to publicly say that, but behind closed doors, it becomes corporations and those with money that actually dictate how the government runs. All those billions of dollars that the government put into science projects after the success of the Manhattan Project, now that's gone from things that help the public, such as health innovations, to things that help corporations. Now politicians feel more accountable to their corporate donors than those who elected them. In fact, they are, as their donors actually had more say in who stays in power. So if you want to know who controls these politicians, all you have to do is follow the money. This is double as important, especially since the decline of unions will lead to less of their money going into politics, and someone's going to have to fund those expensive political campaigns. So if it has to be Wall Street firms and DC lobbyists, so be it. And if you can ensure that corporate lobbyists outnumber labor lobbyists by more than 10 times, well then you are going to be a very rich politician. You need to make it boring, make it professional, make it legal, make it lifelong. After all, what constituent or citizen will be reading through the fine print of legislation or calling their senators every other day? They're too distracted for that, and even if some do, there will never be enough people to actually make a dent. It'll get so bad that you can openly say that you put other countries' interests ahead of your own.
Does that mean I think we should put the interests of America over Israel? No.
I came into Congress 13 years ago with the stated intention of being the leading defender of Israel in the United States Senate.
Great.
And I've worked every day to do that.
I know it sounds crazy, but I promise you we can do it. Just follow my instructions. And to make it worse, you need to ensure that congressmen can't work with each other. Congress itself can't work. Push each party more and more to the extreme. Make the rhetoric more divisive and get them to attack each other instead of working together. Policy now needs a 60-vote Senate supermajority to pass, thanks to the filibuster. That means that a senator can delay voting on the bill indefinitely unless 60 senators agree to overwrite that, and good luck convincing 8 to 10 members of the opposing party to join you. All this time though, it's the same people and more importantly corporations that own both of them. Congressmen run consulting firms for corporations on the side, and former congressmen become lobbyists for the same companies they were supposedly regulating just last week. Suddenly, rules aren't enforced. Antitrust doesn't really exist. Corporations are allowed to do whatever they want. Monopolies dominate, leading to depressed wages for workers, higher prices, and worse quality for consumers. Suddenly, it's the norm for companies to move fast and break things. Regulations come later. For now, startups grow so quickly that by the time regulations catch up, they have entire cities hooked onto their apps. Credit cards? That's now called buy now, pay later, without any of the protections of credit regulations. Gambling? We prefer prediction markets. Taxi drivers? No. They're ride-sharing entrepreneurs. Otherwise, they'd be entitled to things like minimum wage and sickpay. Everything is either a crypto scam or gambling under another name. This all makes Black Mirror look like a prediction, not a warning or science fiction. Even presidents are launching and supporting their own crypto scams. The amount of people that are losing from fraud rises by 50% just from 2022 to 2024. Everything that people eat has microplastics in it. It's made of 1 million ingredients and 8-syllable chemicals, hormone disruptors, fake ingredients, so much sugar in everything that over 150 million Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic. For those counting, that's almost half the country. Push tens of millions of women onto birth control, which disrupts their hormones in ways that we will not understand the effect of until decades in the future. Exactly like the opioid crisis. Push tens of millions of Americans onto antidepressants and other drugs that will also disrupt their hormones in ways we will not understand the effect of until decades in the future. Again, exactly like the opioid crisis. Everything is becoming both more expensive and worse at the same time. A growing monthly bill to do anything in this economy. Features that were marketed as standard like heated seats or automatic parking are now locked behind a monthly subscription paywall. You will own nothing and be happy. Now we have entire generations that are raised on these apps and tablets, labeled iPad kids. A generation whose measurable skills in the classroom and general life skills decrease year on year. A generation that can't read, has no motor skills, no social skills, and no discipline, completely spoiled because of the propaganda that their parents were fed by you. Kids who had their minds destroyed by non-stop access to the most incoherent content on social media, games, and videos that hijack their instant dopamine systems instead of helping their brain develop. And more recently, they're being hooked onto AI slop with a fleeting 1.5-second attention span. Step 3. Make fraud legal. Make sure it's everywhere. That lobbying mentioned in Step 2, alongside the deregulation and liberalization mentioned in Step 1, led to an explosion in wealth for corporations and their shareholders. Suddenly, you had so much money sloshing around, and with capital gain taxes slashed, that money has to return even more money, and even more money than the year before. Now, your job as the agent of chaos is to make sure that the money becomes as toxic as possible. You need to encourage as much money as possible into investment vehicles that make no sense. Vehicles that are made up of just straight up fraud upon fraud. Vehicles that are so toxic that it's basically guaranteed to go bust and bring down other sectors with them. Break down the walls between investment opportunities, the ones that don't make any sense, and then make it impossible to regulate or supervise. Make sure that the economy becomes more and more dependent on that sector, a sector which doesn't really provide any value to society, all whilst you offshore the actual manufacturing jobs abroad. All thanks to the neoliberalism mentioned earlier. After all, it's not like that's an indicator of an empire's decline or anything. It's the shift from making wealth to managing wealth that often catches it out. In the 1600s, the Dutch Republic was the warehouse of the world. They were the best producers and dominated. They built the best ships, produced the best clothes, and had great dominance in trade and industry. However, the Dutch realized that they could make more money by lending to foreign governments than by manufacturing, so it transitioned to a financial and services-based economy. Whilst that helped them become richer in the short term, it turned them into a rentier state as they deindustrialized. When the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War hit, the Dutch had plenty of gold but no industrial capacity to build a new fleet fast enough. Britain, which had focused on industrializing and production, crushed them and eventually took the title of the superpower. Funnily enough, that same scenario then happened to the British Empire, which produced almost a quarter of global manufacturing in 1880. And their dominance was toppled by the Germans and then by the Americans, which once again is now going through the same thing. They deindustrialized their economy and shipped manufacturing from towns and cities reliant on it, such as Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Chicago, that were the workshop of the world, to places in China, Vietnam, Thailand, and Southeast Asia. Just like Amsterdam became the financial hub, it moved to London and now it shares it with New York City. Whilst it provided a lot of high-paying jobs and economic stimulus, moving from a production-based economy to a purely services-based economy was a sign of decline. Make sure to push the system a couple of times, both to stress test the politicians who you bought out, as well as to implant the message that bailouts to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars and sometimes $1 trillion are a reasonable and logical response. You rebrand bailouts as keeping innovation alive and part of healthy capitalism. You have now successfully privatized profits and socialized losses. That is now government policy. On to the real deal. As if there wasn't enough fraud, create a shadow banking sector that basically operates with complete impunity. No regulations whatsoever. If you do it right, you'll have CEOs of banks bragging about how any antitrust concerns could be handled by just calling up their friend, the President of the United States. Okay, but this is still just affecting wealthy people. To really kill the economy, you need to start affecting working people too. And what do working people want more than anything? Bingo. Start targeting average people and prey on their hopes and aspirations of owning a home. After all, what is the American dream besides being a homeowner? Repeal regulation that was passed in the Great Depression, regulations that protected average workers. Now, investment banks and commercial banks can merge, but the new company wasn't an amalgamation of both. It had the resources of the commercial side with the culture of the investment bank. Now, the investment bank side can take random people's deposits, working people's deposits, their assets and their money, and punt it onto its useless, fake, fraudulent investments. Every single bank that would have customer deposits is now suddenly entangled with hundreds of billions of regular people's deposits. So finally, now, if the wind blows with just enough strength, the whole house of cards comes crashing down. And you know what would be even funnier, even more damaging to the country, even more than allowing all this to happen and effectively legalizing it? What if you don't prosecute anyone? No one goes to jail. Well, except that one guy from Deutsche Bank. Destroy any idea that Americans might have in the authenticity and legitimacy of the system. Don't even entertain it. Now we have maximum damage, the cherry on top. Aggressive lobbying from the financial giants like Citigroup, HSBC, JP Morgan Chase, and others push the idea that these institutions are too big to fail. That means that the government has to spend taxpayer money bailing them out. They face no consequences whilst the average person loses their savings, is fired from their job, or is kicked out of the house, maybe even all three. In the years leading up to the crash, the incomes of the top 1% grew 10% annually, whilst the typical American family actually became poorer. Okay, we're still going. We're not done yet. What you need to do is take the taxes, money that the average person pays to the government, and spend it on propping up asset prices. The thing that is pretty much exclusively owned by the wealthy. A direct wealth transfer from working class to the rich. Isn't that genius? Okay, to break from the Agent of Chaos character for a second, this is something that not nearly enough people are angry about. 2008 is the death of the real economy. It's why we are in such a financial mess right now. To this day, 20 years later, there are honestly like 6 or 7 cases of major fraud and misconduct. It's criminal and honestly just disgusting. The reason not enough people are angry about it is because most people don't actually know what happened. I want to make a video explaining all the ways that the '08 crisis destroyed the global economy and how they knew about it all along. If you want to keep up with when that video drops, or you found this video interesting, make sure to subscribe. Okay, back into the Agent of Chaos. Step 4. Reality is whatever you want it to be. Okay, careful, I think you may have caused a bit too much damage. And now the people are taking notice. By now, the state is just a servant of the ultra-rich, too paralyzed by gridlock and corporate interests to actually address everyday people's problems. You want to continue this path of destruction for as long as possible and cause the most amount of damage. Good thing you've been following this guide, because if you did, you'd have already started this step. This machine requires a divided class of people to remain effective. If the working class realized how much they were losing out because of you, well then they would unite to reform the system. And we can't be having that. So you ensure that the people are blaming each other, or blaming people that have nothing to do with the problems. Thanks to the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine in 1987, media outlets no longer need to cover issues fairly. Yeah, that's right, that's not a joke. They can unfairly cover topics and infuse their bias to whatever level they want. Absolutely beautiful for controlling populations and great news for us. The Telecoms Act of 1996 relaxes ownership limits and helps you consolidate power. So you need to destroy independent and local media networks and centralize attention around a handful of billionaire-owned media outlets. Those outlets will say whatever you want them to say. And it works perfectly. 1/3 of local papers are gone between 2005 and 2024. 200 counties no longer have a local paper, and 1,500 counties have only one, leading to over 15 million Americans, or 1 in 7, to live in a news desert. And this has a big effect on the voter base. The media effectively controls the masses. It's been proven that the introduction of Fox News into local markets results in an increase in the Republican vote share. The same also works for MSNBC, but on a smaller scale. Thanks to you, they become more polarized and partisan, and when local news aren't there to discuss local issues, everyone suddenly becomes more tuned into national politics instead, and right through the lens of extreme partisanship. Suddenly, the average person is tuned into one of the 2 flavors of TV, Team Red or Team Blue, and both have such contempt for the other side that it seeps into their viewers. When you're the main outlet for people on your side to consume content, you can prioritize or bury whatever you want.
Mr. Potato Head is going gender neutral.
The social justice warriors see racism everywhere. There's no author who's white who's truly safe. So they see white supremacy, discrimination against Asians.
Well, the government of Palm Springs, California, out in the desert, is plotting a war on racist trees.
President Obama kicked off a firestorm over the weekend, the so-called latte salute. Critics say the president disrespected our Marines by saluting with his drink in his hand.
One of the ugliest suits in the history of America.
I think it was shocking to a lot of people.
Look at that horrible light tan suit. An impeachable offense right there.
I looked twice to make sure he wasn't a circus ringmaster. The only thing missing was the top hat.
Whoever talked him into going into a tan suit, they're so desperate because of these low poll numbers, they're willing to do anything.
A serious businessman wears dark blue or black to important meetings. I think it's a sign to enemies that he's a wimp.
This confirms he's a martyr.
After all, a country the size of America cannot stay sane if there's a new national scandal, distraction, or argument every other night. Okay, but small crisis. Traditional media is going out of fashion, and a new form of online social media is taking place. How can we show our influence and destruction continues? Simple. Make them addicted. Use psychological triggers and levers to keep them hooked. Once that's done, use the algorithm to make them enraged. After all, the more enraged, the more they scroll, the more money we make whilst destroying society. I covered everything about this in this video. I honestly think it is one of the most important videos I've ever made, so make sure to watch it after this one. But now, people are stuck online with no real friends. They become dependent on their parasocial relations, obsessing over people who don't even know they exist. Once you're chronically online, they can control everything about you. Your hobbies, your emotions, your role models, even your thoughts and opinions. Public opinion revolves around people not due to their intelligence, experience, or merit, but how entertaining, interesting, or loud and obnoxious they are. Make sure that people care about clout. All they care about is clout. If you have less than 50k followers, who even are you? Influencers are now engaged in a race to the bottom, all in an arms race to get clicks and clout. The role models used to be wholesome, intelligent, and hardworking. Astronauts, firefighters, teachers, even politicians when they were actually honest. Now, you have to make sure that their role models are degenerates, gangsters, prostitutes, murderers, and bums in society. More fighting, more nudity, more drama, more drinking, more drugs, more degeneracy, more fraud, more beef, more outrage. You need to talk about destroying your bones, doing steroids at the age of 15, and doing heroin to remain viral. And even then, they will probably be replaced by someone else who's even more extreme in like 3 to 6 months. What seemed fringe or extreme 1 to 2 years ago is the bare minimum to go viral today, or even remain relevant. Everything becomes a rug pull, everything is a crypto scam, everyone is in it for a quick buck. Don't forget, lobbying has made sure that there are practically no regulations or protections here. These platforms are basically training people to become monkeys, mindless slaves to the algorithm, both the creators and consumers. After all, they're easier to control this way, so that's a win for us. Create algorithms that favor outrage, especially if the information is false or dishonest. Fake culture wars, men and women hating each other, people of every race and religion out to get you specifically. And it has to be real because the algorithm showed you, right? None of it was. It was all fake, and it's all being done by a handful of people who are worth more than entire countries. Once more, having a high trust society is crucial to creating solidarity and cohesion, and therefore keeps people together. Make sure you target that. Neighbors viewing each other as existential threats, people from different backgrounds are suddenly the reason the government stopped working. And you think to be outraged over every other day. Also, you forget who really owns these systems, who coincidentally are owned by the same people who own all the media channels, both traditional and social. No one wants to solve problems for each other anymore. No one has any love or civic solidarity for each other. After all, who's got the time to fact check all the bile and fake news that you are shown 24/7? When am I going to do a deep dive or read 4 books about this topic? In between my 3 18-hour shifts? Or on my 1 day off perhaps? The default human state is to be attracted to outrage and still believe the information even when they're shown they're wrong. This is great news for you. Reality can now become whatever you want it to be. You can now make people think an election was falsely stolen. The truth doesn't go viral anymore. The vibe does. So push misogynist content onto young boys. Push men to disregard women, to play them, to view them purely from the angle of objects to acquire or conquest to complete. If you design them right, these algorithms can quadruple the amount of misogynistic content shown in just 5 days. Who knows what that will do to young men? Just straight misogyny from the second you get onto the platform. Over-sexualization, objectification, manosphere gurus teaching you to have a rotation of women, how to manipulate them to sleeping with you, why you should always care less than them in a relationship, why you should never get married or settle down. All they have to offer are their bodies and making sandwiches. Now you have schoolboys refusing to speak to female teachers as a result. Female teachers barked at and abused by their own male students, blocking doors and all-round abuse or misogynistic insults. And on the other side, push women to not settle down, to raise their standards all the time, push women to sleep around often and always think they can do better. After all, 3/4 of Tinder's user base is made up of men who have a match rate of just 0.6%. So they can see that they're just constantly desired, just maybe not for long-term relationships. They are effectively the product on these dating apps. And they literally are the product on every other porn website. To prevent the labels of objectification and degradation, call it liberation, call it empowerment. If you play your cards right, you might even get 14% of all American young women to post their bodies on these platforms, almost 1 in 7. At this point, you ruin men's brains so much that it's not even borderline pedophilic, it just is outright pedophilic.
At 12:01 a.m. on her 18th birthday, she posts her OnlyFans link, and within hours, she's made $1 million.
Thank you to all my supporters who have pre-ordered since 2018.
So you knew that you were going to go this route probably about a year out, knowing that you had an audience built up.
I've been planning this since I was 9.
Tonight, Elon Musk's AI chatbot Grok coming under fire from regulators across the globe over a rise in non-consensual and sexualized deepfake images of women and children.
There were only more requests to produce more explicit images of me, including ones of photos of me when I was underage, and Grok obliged and produced all of these images.
More than 50% of images generated by Grok between December 25th and January 1st were non-consensual sexual images, primarily targeting women, and 2% of them depicting a person who appeared to be 18 or younger.
X said it has restricted requests to undress people in images to paying users only.
Push women to only enjoy and chase the attention of online validation. They don't need no man.
These men ain't what?
Men ain't shit.
Right.
Man ain't shit.
What did you realize about men, how they operate?
Ain't shit.
The assumption epidemic means that people make assumptions about each other on dating apps before getting to know them. They're colder, more aggressive, less forgiving, and quick to judge off the bat. That leads to more distrust and shorter lasting relationships that feel emptier. And to fill that void, create AI girlfriends for the majority of men who are just unable to find any girls, just completely unable. Both because standards are increasing, as well as it becoming so easy to be a bum. Video games, pornography, doom scrolling, how can anyone compete against multiple multi-trillion-dollar companies? Companies made up of thousands of experts whose entire job it is to just keep you weak, hooked and consuming. An entire generation of men without any purpose, discipline, community or drive. That's all you're doing, and blame them for it. The loneliness epidemic is all their fault. Because if it takes a village to raise a child, what happens when you no longer have that village? The child is no longer raised properly. All that while some estimates put the users of AI companions at over 1 billion, spending an average of 93 minutes every single day. They cannot escape it. Even the normal AI chatbots like Grok and ChatGPT will have adult mode soon integrated into them, so everyone is hooked onto porn. Kids logging into any social media account will immediately be blasted with softcore pornography from the minute they open their accounts. Because that is what social media does. Incels, misogynists, misandrists, and forever gender wars. That is the goal here. After all, marriage is the most foundational relationship which everything in society stems from. If you destroy that, then what more do you need to do? And that's not just from the social indoctrination. That's also from the great work that you've been putting in these last few steps. Rising cost of living, not enough time to date, poor job security, everyone is polarized. Who is able to have a relationship, get married, or, God forbid, have kids? Loneliness is rising year on year, all thanks to these tools. And as always, make sure that everyone knows about how bad these tools are for society. Just to make it even sweeter when you see no one regulating it. Don't forget, you've already bought out all the politicians. What are they going to do? Step 5. Tell them it's all their fault. Stop buying avocados. Okay, we're almost at the end. You want to finish this country off, but how do you do it? You're lucky you have me here for this. The issue is that you have the wealthiest and most successful generation in human history, the baby boomers. The generation that was given the golden deal, a house you can actually buy, college that you can actually afford with a part-time summer job, a job that can actually turn into a lifelong career with good pay, and retirement that didn't require you to become a dropshipper or day trader. But here's the issue. They may actually leave behind their wealth for the next generations. That might mess things up, as most of the top 1% is made up of disproportionately older people. That means that the wealth may actually end up being distributed to the struggling generations. The system might even itself out. All of our work might start to get undone. We need to get creative. So here's the game plan. You indoctrinate the boomers against the younger generations. Gone are the days where people want to create a better life for their kids and grandkids, better than they had, even at their own expense. Boomers are given an absolute generational run, an artificial leg up. However, the moment it's their turn to pass it on, the ladder comes up. And suddenly, it's all about personal responsibility. Kids want universal healthcare? My healthcare works fine. Kids want cheaper college or help with their loans? I never got a handout. Kids struggling with bills or their incomes aren't keeping up? You should just work harder and stop buying avocados or drinking coffees. That's why you're poor. Kids struggling with the job market? Just go to the place with your resume. They'll really appreciate it. After all, a face-to-face introduction and a firm handshake to the CEO was all I needed to get a job. Kids are locked out of the housing market? Well, we'd love to help, but I have like 3 houses, so I wouldn't want to lower their value. If we're going to accept that America was doing well at some point and people got rich off it, let's at least make sure that the wealth is locked up until they're dead. If anything, we can use that to our advantage. For example, because they got so wealthy, they're basically the only generation that's allowed in politics due to how expensive it is to actually run. So they are overrepresented in politics despite being too old to know what the real problems are that people are facing, as well as being too old to care. Imagine being so old and so out of touch that as the education secretary talking about tech in schools, you start calling AI A1.
But that there is a school system that's going to start making sure that first graders or even pre-Ks have A1 teaching, every year starting, that far down in the grades. And that's just that's a wonderful thing. Now, okay, let's see A1 and how can that be helpful? How can it be helpful in one-on-one instruction?
Well, if so, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
I see.
Mr. Chu, does TikTok access the home Wi-Fi network?
Only if the user turns on the Wi-Fi. I'm sorry, I may not understand the
So if I have
question.
TikTok app on my phone and my phone is on my home Wi-Fi network, does TikTok access that network?
It will have to access the network to get connections to the internet, if that's the question.
I have an iPhone, and if I move from here and go over there and sit with my Democrat friends, which will make them real nervous, does Google track my movement? Does Google, through this phone, know that I have moved here and moved over to the left? It's either yes or no.
Not by default. There may be a Google service which you've opted into use, and if...
So Google knows that I am moving over there. It's not a trick question. You know, you make $100 million a year, you ought to be able to answer that question. Does Google know through this phone that I am moving over there and sit next to Mr. Johnson, which would make him real nervous?
And there are so many more examples as well. Boomers consistently vote in much higher amounts, more than double some younger generations. So they pass laws that they care about, laws that favour boomers and the rich, laws that ensure that the taxes on the things they want stay low, or ensuring that funding towards programs that affects them, such as Social Security or Medicare, stays high. But not extending those programs to the younger generations. Get them to ignore things that matter to younger generations, such as climate change, university affordability, youth unemployment, and Medicare for all. Make sure the government keeps asset prices high, as that's where boomers have their wealth tied up in. They could sell their houses, by the way, as they live in houses far too big for them, but they won't. If these assets are like a relay race, make sure that the boomers hold onto them for as long as possible and use up as much as they can before handing it over. But you kids need to buy a house to build your wealth. Just ignore the fact that their student loans basically means you have no savings to begin with. Plus that house prices are outpacing wages by a long margin. What we're doing is encouraging the baby boomers to have the party of their life, trashing the house and leaving the mess for future generations to pick up. Destroy any hidden contract that would be in place. Higher education no longer means a good job. Plus, it's not even cheap. Housing is a great investment, just not for you. And you too should get involved in this great democracy. Just make sure you're worth at least like $10 million before that. You need to pay into Social Security, the biggest drain on the government's finances, which is a direct wealth transfer from the younger generations to baby boomers. But there won't be anything for you when you retire. By the time you inherit anything, it's all spent propping up their lifestyle in retirement. Good luck. Any dream of social mobility or economic stability is gone down the drain. And that's when you realize no single person or agent coordinated this. No shadowy government infiltrated American institutions and sabotaged it from the inside. No foreign actor had anything to do with this. This was all domestic. Everything just stems from people trying to make as much money as possible to destroy this country. You don't need to do anything except promote this one ideology, capitalism, which in practice is to make money at any cost and ignore those in need. The irony is that this ideology is very irrational. It will eat the system up for its own short-term gain. Do you remember Jack Welch from earlier? The CEO of General Electric, the man who broke capitalism, the man who made so much money and was the pillar of how capitalism is meant to go. Well, after he retired, the company pretty much imploded. It lost 80% of its value just in the 2008 crisis due to how fraudulent it was. And in 2021, split into 3 companies. These tactics were shown to be fraudulent and not survive long term. However, they're also the same tactics that embody corporate America. They're so toxic that they can only survive for a short time, and when they are implemented, are also implemented at the expense of the workers, the communities, public interests, the environment, and basically everyone who isn't part of like the top 0.1%. Workers are viewed as a cost to be minimized or fought rather than the company's greatest asset, and that was bound to happen. If it wasn't Jack Welch, it would be someone else. The company that outsources, lays off, crushes unions, and everything else is bound to be better and beat the company that doesn't, because they care about the employees and communities. But then it's also bound to not survive in the long run. That's why it's rational. No one wins here except the like 20 people who own shares in the company. Rich people are setting up bunkers in case nuclear war or the apocalypse were to ever break out. They're also insulated by the effects of climate change that they caused. Trickle-down economics never worked, and that lie has robbed millions of workers from hundreds of billions of their own wages, stolen by corporations who need to make the stock price go up by 0.7% by next month. This is what happens when rich people get richer. It's a disease of the mind, to have more money than entire cities and sometimes countries, and not just wanting more, but not even wanting to use it to help people despite it bearing no negative consequences to you. Take AI and robotics as an example. In the long term, we can create everything we want. We can ensure everyone has enough food, a roof over their head, and cheap, renewable, and sustainable energy. But we won't, because this ideology only brings those benefits to the top 0.1% of people who happen to own stock in these AI companies. The rest of us, however, become unemployed or have to work worse and worse jobs. They say they have morals, then quietly change it when it becomes less profitable. If you follow this easy 5-step guide, congratulations. That is how you take a country that was so prosperous it literally could have not just afforded to end poverty at home, but also global poverty too, and turn it into a failing state. Not a failed state yet, but another 5 to 10 years and it will be there. This video covered how America destroyed its domestic base and ended its superpower bases. If you want to see the international version of this video, how America's status as the global superpower is ending, and comparisons in history, how empires fall and why America is next, Click here.